Sickle cell is the name for a group of inherited blood cell disorders that leads the sickle cells to become crescent in shape. This affects their ability to travel through the veins and carry oxygen in the blood to organs. This then results in pain and other side effects, such as leg ulcers, issues with the gallstones, increased risk of stroke, and many other issues. Sickle cell can also be seen as an invisible disease that can strip one of their independence, of their social engagement. It can strip them of their emotional and mental well-being, and also their physical well-being, because the pain is severe. It can come on at any time with no warning, and it can be very debilitating. However, it's not a death sentence. Individuals can live full and healthy lives with sickle cell. They may experience more health challenges, but they can still live life to the fullest based on their own desires and wishes.
Welcome to Consultation Room Podcast. Welcome to another episode. Today, we're diving into a topic that affects billions of people worldwide: sickle cell disease. It's a condition that brings upon pain, challenges, and resilience, yet it's still widely misunderstood. Joining us today, we have a special guest called Jaudat. She's a sickle cell advocate and the founder of Sickle Cell Sister Community Interest Company. She's here today to share her journey, the struggles, the triumphs, and the lessons learned along the way. So sit back, tune in, and let's get into it.
Welcome to the pod, Jaudat. So we're going to dive right into it. What has been your journey with sickle cell, and when were you first diagnosed, and what were the signs and symptoms that led to this diagnosis?
So sickle cell is actually an inherited disease. So I've had it since birth. But I think the time that I would say I became aware that I had it was maybe in primary school. And I think the memory stems not even necessarily from pain crises, but from the experience of isolation in school and exclusion from certain activities to prevent a pain crisis. I think that's my first memory of actually being aware of, oh, I have sickle cell disease. But I'm sure if you were to ask my mum, she would obviously recall, I think I had a health challenge when I was around 2 years old, where I was rushed to the hospital. So she would recall that as kind of maybe my first encounter or my first health challenge associated with sickle cell. But for me personally, I think it's in that primary school experience of not being able to do certain things.
Okay.
You've mentioned something just briefly. You've said that you were rushed to hospital when you were 2. Is there a reason? So what exactly, what led to that?
I have to be honest, I couldn't even really tell you the details.
Right.
The little that I remember from the conversation I've had with my mum is around, I think, some sort of infection. And she had to rush me to the hospital, and maybe something with my breathing. And then the doctors had to give me antibiotics to kind of tackle that.
Wow. I can't believe, like, at such a young age, that happened, 2 years, because as you said, it's inherited, and it's actually quite sad. Like, when you mentioned it, I actually remembered there's actually a little girl as well who's a friend of my son, and she also just found out that she has sickle cell disease. Obviously, like, I was trying to quiz her, like, if she knows about it, but at a young age, I must say she's actually quite knowledgeable as well. I think she's been, they've explained it to her, but I just felt so sad for her, because there were times like she had to miss out on school, like you said, and stuff. And I can see that it can really affect you at a young age. So you've already mentioned a few bits, but how has sickle cell affected your daily life, like from childhood to now? And what does like a typical day look like for you when you're feeling well versus like when you're having a crisis?
So I think when I reflect on kind of my journey, so I'm 27 this year. So let's
Oh,
just to give
You're
perspective,
young.
should I say, a bit of
yeah.
background. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think at a younger age, when I was around from that primary school age, so if I start from 10 till about 16, I think for me personally, I felt very isolated at times, very secluded, just because there was a lot of things that I couldn't do in
Mm,
school or with my friends. So in primary school, the pattern was every time that the class were going for swimming, I was
mm,
seated outside the head teacher's office with pen and paper. So I wasn't
Mm.
necessarily being punished, but it felt like punishment because
Pleasure.
mm,
everyone's going to do something fun and I'm outside their teacher's office, or I'm
Yeah.
in the second year sixth class repeating a maths lesson that I did earlier in the
wow.
morning. So there's, and when I kind of reflect on my journey with sickle cell as well, there's obviously the holistic element to it.
Mm,
So there's the mental effect, the emotional effect, as well as the
Mm.
physical pain you encounter, and then also
mm,
the social and spiritual element. So I think
mm,
from my younger ages, what I recall most is kind of the emotional and mental social elements to
mm,
it, whereby I just felt a
Mm.
bit isolated, a bit down. And at a younger age, it's a bit more difficult to understand
yeah.
why you can't do certain things. You know, everyone's
Exactly.
going for PE and playing dodgeball. Why do I have to sit on the bench?
Mm,
Or everybody's playing outside at break time on a winter day and I'm inside outside her teacher's office. But I think
mm,
as I got older and I began to mature, I think I recall the pain crises more during my teenage years. And I think
Mm.
that's when I began to understand and maybe learn to understand, I should say, my body and how it could
mm,
cope with different things, whether it be cold weather or physical exertion.
Yeah.
Because there's many kind of triggers for sickle cell, and for each individual with sickle cell, it can be different. So for me
mm.
personally, at a younger age, it was cold. If I was out in the
Okay.
cold for too long, or even not even out too long, just exposed a bit of draft, that could cause a whole pain crisis that could
Mm.
last
Mm,
anything from a few hours to a week. I think for me, my
Wow.
worst crisis, pain crisis, lasts like a week.
wow.
Um,
Wow.
and that's literally a week of pain. You would take painkillers, it would ease the pain for a few hours, and then
Mm,
it could come back before your next pain
wow.
medication dose is due.
Mm.
So
Mm,
yeah, it was, I think so my childhood age, I would say, or my childhood stage, should I say,
mm,
I found it most challenging with emotional and social well-being. That was where I
yeah.
Mm.
felt the impact the most. And then as I
Yeah.
transitioned into my teenage years, it was mostly the physical element as well as the mental element as well.
Mm,
Um, that I can recall anyways. I think my mum would obviously give you a different perspective in terms of how
yeah.
frequent crises were. And
Yeah.
at this stage of my life, I think I've reached a stage now where I'm more understanding of my body. I'm more
Mm.
Mm,
understanding of my triggers, how to prevent them, how to
mm,
Yes.
respond to them to avoid a crisis escalating and lasting up
okay.
to a week or something like that. Um,
Mm,
but yeah, there's still kind of social challenges. But
mm.
yeah, I'll leave that for a bit later. But yeah, that's kind of an overview, should I say.
Did mention your pain usually lasts like a week. I think we just want to know for like some people, yeah, they are probably wondering where do you feel like the pain and stuff. Personally,
Mm.
yeah, where do you normally feel the pain when you have like a crisis?
So it can be anywhere in the body.
Mm,
I think growing up, I remember I would have it most in my legs, my
okay,
arms, my back. Nowadays, and it can be all of those areas at the same time.
I
But
see.
nowadays, for me, it might be just the hip or the knee,
Wow,
sometimes the ankle. So at this stage of my life, it can be isolated. So not the whole
wow.
body, but isolated
Mm,
areas. But it mostly occurs in like the joints, but really it
mm,
could be anywhere. There's like this sensation that I get before a pain crisis really
mm,
escalates, and it would be like, like pins and needles, but I would feel it in my lips and sometimes my jaw.
I see.
So there's that, and that's kind of like a warning sign for me. But yeah,
Mm,
an individual can experience it anywhere in the body, and where they experience it will depend on how their body
mm,
functions and their own experience.
That
mhm.
just really puts into perspective how
Yeah.
unpredictable sickle cell can be. And
Yeah.
I mean, from what you've said, it's not just the physical pain, but it's literally the constant adjustments that you have to make in your daily life. And honestly, living with a condition that requires so much, almost self-care, adjustments is, it takes a lot of mental strength, to be fair. So you have mentioned pain. How do you manage pain during a crisis? Is there any treatments or home remedies that you have used that, that seem to have worked for you?
So for me personally, and okay, my response might be a bit controversial because there's different ways of managing a sickle cell crisis, again, depending on the person and their body. So growing up, I'm one of 7 daughters that my mum has, and my mum plus 5 of us have sickle cell. But my mum also is a nurse, so she always taught us kind of preventative measures. So that would include kind of like the heating would always be on, kind of refraining from drinking cold water or being exposed to the cold, always making sure we're wearing layers, and also being attentive to our diet. So when I have a pain crisis, growing up, it would be painkillers, which would include paracetamol and ibuprofen, or it could be cocodamol and ibuprofen. So me personally, my stomach doesn't react well to ibuprofen. So it would be paracetamol and codeine at different intervals, or it would just be cocodamol at a higher dose. So that's kind of how I've always managed my pain. But as I got older, I found out about a heat pad. So not a water bottle, but similar in function. I use a heat pad. And for me now, at this stage of my life, that is quite effective. So if I feel that I'm experiencing pain in my knee, for example, and it's at the early stages, if I put a heat pad on it, it could ease the pain without me needing to take painkillers. But I find that if I'm not able to do that, I would have to take the painkillers if the pain reaches a certain level before I'm able to address it. So for example, I was at the gym the other day and I thank God my friend was there because I was doing my workout. And it's actually crazy because I woke up that morning, I was feeling really good, went to the gym and I was doing my workout and then I started feeling pain in my knees. So the moment I felt it, I sat down. But obviously it's the gym, there isn't seats. So I was sitting on a stepping stool. But because of the way I was seated, I felt that the pain wasn't really easing up. So then I left the gym floor and went to the changing rooms. But also, again, not proper seats, it was a bench. So I sat on the bench, but the pain still continued to escalate. So I just messaged my friend and I said, yeah, I'm going to head home because I'm feeling like a crisis is about to come on. I just about made it to the top of the staircase, trying to press the lift, and you have to have access to the lift. So it wasn't opening. And then I had to call my friends like, yeah, could you help me get home, please? So she had to give me a piggyback down the stairs. I got in the car. And by the time I was even in the car, it had escalated from 0 to 100, where usually I would tackle it when I feel it immediately, like a 1 or 2 pain score. So at that point, I had painkillers on me, but I hadn't eaten properly. So that's another thing. A lot of the pain medication is quite strong and it can react on the stomach. So you have to make sure you eat. But I hadn't eaten, so I was reluctant to take them. Thankfully, my car has heated seats and I put that on, put the heating on. But yeah, I was in so much pain. My friend was so scared, bless her, because she knows I have sickle cell, but she's never actually seen me in a crisis. So literally, she was driving to the hospital because I'm in London. So Guy's Hospital has a haematology day unit where they can help you with your pain during the day and then you can go home when you feel ready, which I prefer as opposed to being admitted to the hospital. But yeah, on the way there, I was calling them, trying to make sure that I could actually access the space. And they actually closed because it was a Saturday. They closed on the weekends. So I was like, okay, just take me home. But then by the time we kind of even got back to Southeast London, so we went from Southeast to Central. By the time we got back into Southeast, the pain had started to reduce just by the heat that I was able to absorb. But yeah, that's my friend. I'd scared her so much. But it's just to say, like, the way that I manage pain,
Yeah.
for me personally, if I'm able to respond at a quick rate as soon as I
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
it, then I don't have a crisis for a long period of time. But
I
if I'm
see.
delayed in my ability to respond to it with treatment, whether that's in the form of a heat pad, medication, whatever it may be, then yeah, it can really escalate.
Yeah. Okay.
I've
Okay.
just got a quick question just to do with the
Yeah.
pain. So, you know, like we have aches and pains on a regular basis, you know, just, you know, the rest of us, you know, sickle cell patients, you know, different kind of pain. But how, like, I'm sure you also experience just general pain. How is there a way you can normally differentiate that this is a crisis and this is just, you know, I've just pulled a muscle at the gym yesterday, or like, you know, is there a way to sort of differentiate this kind of like pain
Yeah.
and the crisis?
So presently, like if I tense my back, I'll feel pain just because I've been doing pull-ups at the gym. So that's like just muscle soreness. But if it's a crisis, you will feel it more so. How can I? It depends as well where it is that you're feeling it. But if it's a crisis in my elbow, for example, I'll feel it more in the joints as opposed to kind of the surface of the bone or the muscle, should I say. If it's a really bad crisis, then I will feel it on a more intense, deeper level where I would feel that, okay, this has actually penetrated the bone and that's
I
what's
see.
hurting. But I
Wow.
think it's also kind of with time, obviously, unfortunately, you get used to the feeling of that pain. So you're able to differentiate as well through that. But yeah, I guess it's just the intensity of it and also where I feel it. And also
Okay.
a sickle cell crisis pain is kind of persistent and consistent. So
Okay.
for me, if I get pain in my leg, for example, I will feel it throughout the whole, like through the whole limb
Wow.
consistently. It doesn't ease up.
Right.
Whereas
Right.
like the pain I'm feeling now in my back is only if I do a certain movement or if I tense, then I'll feel it in the muscle.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's quite enlightening because most of the time, like, you know, most people think that, oh, maybe the sickle cell pain is just like a normal pain. So it's quite good to know from your perspective, like how it is and yeah, and how you manage it. You mentioned earlier that you hated being admitted to hospital. How often do you go to the hospital or have you been admitted and why do you hate it? Like, what's your experience like for you when you're in the hospital?
Um, so as I was saying earlier, where my mum's a nurse and there's a lot of us
Mm,
with sickle cell, she's
yeah.
always taught us how to manage it at home. So we've always
Mm,
kind of known our routine, what to do to kind of prevent that need for hospital admission. But
yeah.
I'm the only one in my family that's been admitted to hospital. And initially that wasn't because of not being able to manage the pain at home, but because I was having challenges with my stomach. So one of
Okay.
the health challenges associated with sickle cell is gallstones in the gallbladder. So if I'm not wrong, it's the excess bilirubin that builds up and can form gallstones in the gallbladder.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a challenge with that for quite a few years. It really affected my diet.
Mm,
And my painkillers for my sickle cell crisis would also trigger that because it was affecting like the whole digestive system. So a side
mm.
effect of cocodamol, the codeine in it can cause constipation. And
Yeah.
then if I become constipated, that triggers the
Mm,
gallstones and that stomach pain in that area. So back to your question, that was the first, because of that was the first time that I was admitted to hospital
okay.
because I was
Mm,
having a series of flare-ups in my stomach where
mm,
maybe I would eat something or I wouldn't eat, and then my whole stomach would be hurting to the extent that I'm throwing up, I'm getting hot flashes, I'm
oh,
passing out.
wow.
It was really bad. Thank God that's an old
Mm-hmm.
past period of my life. But
Yeah.
Mm,
yeah, it was really bad. And at one point I had that experience with my stomach, those challenges with my stomach, as well as a crisis at the same time.
Wow.
So it was like to address the crisis, I would need the cocodamol, but then
mm,
the cocodamol would further trigger the stomach
Your stomach,
issues.
exactly.
So that was the cause for me being first. That was the cause of me being admitted to hospital the first time that I
okay.
was, so that I could get painkillers through the veins.
Mm,
Um, to address the sickle cell crisis, and then other medications to address the gallstone situation. So that was my first experience, and I wouldn't say it was awful, but it wasn't great. You're in A&E for a very long time before you're seen, and the doctors and nurses that treat you in A&E have very little awareness of what sickle cell is.
If they have any.
Exactly. So you're in the ER space and you have doors open, you're exposed to cold, it's furthering the pain.
Wow.
Or you're being given medication, but you're not being given it at the right times. Or even sometimes just the attitude and behavior of the nurse where they're very dismissive or they're not really taking you seriously. So that was my first experience. I've been to hospital maybe 5 times, the first 2 because of the stomach situation. And then the last 3 was more around pain crisis. I think the last 3 was more so around me being cautious of not wanting to trigger my stomach. So the pain being really far gone to the point that I couldn't, because I have a very high pain tolerance. But dealing with a sickle crisis also requires a lot of mental capacity. Like you have to really push through mentally and regulate your emotions, because if you're having a crisis and you become overwhelmed and you're crying and you're anxious, then that then escalates the crisis and the problem becomes bigger. So yeah, it takes a lot of mental and emotional capacity. So I think the times that I have decided to go to hospitals when I just don't have the mental or emotional capacity to tolerate the pain, and that's when I would go to the hospital so that I could get stronger painkillers and fluids. But I think from my experience, I have found that when I have gone to the hospital, aside from the poor treatment from NHS staff, there's also the element where I found that when I have a crisis after, so let's say I was admitted in the hospital last year, May. Maybe I got pain treatment and then the crisis resolved and I went home. And then let's say I have a crisis in June last year. I find that my tolerance for that pain is a lot lower, because when you have the pain management at the hospital, it resolves it at a much quicker rate. Which when you're at home, you don't have the access to the intravenous medication, you don't have the access to the fluids. So it takes a lot more longer for your body to respond to the tablet medication. And for me, I don't want to lose that resilience, because for me personally, that resilience is what helps me to be able to go to the gym or go on holidays, or, you know, I'm able to do a lot more of the things that I enjoy just because I have a higher tolerance. Whereas if my tolerance decreases, I feel like it will limit my ability to explore in the way that I do, because then if the pain comes, I'm going to struggle.
True. Wow. That is so tough just to imagine, you know, how exhausting and even frustrating it must be, especially because, you know, for you, the hospital is pretty much a regular part of your life, whether you're admitted or even just visiting the hospital. And the healthcare system, let's be honest, can be overwhelming. And honestly, I can only imagine how important it is to have the right support. And, you know, as you said, sometimes the doctors and nurses might be dismissive, or they might not necessarily even understand what a crisis is. So honestly, you know, I personally can only imagine how tough that must be, and, you know, how strong you have to be able to like just get through, you know, a crisis. But something you mentioned is they don't, you know, some healthcare providers, some healthcare workers, so some nurses and some doctors might not necessarily understand what crisis is. So would you say that there's been any stigma or misconceptions about sickle cell, and how have you dealt with them? Not just from, you know, from the nurses and doctors who treat you or who might not understand it, but from even people around you.
I think there's a lot of stigma and misconception, and also a lack of awareness. You know, in all areas and all walks of my life, there's always been an encounter or two in different sectors, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in education, even amongst family and friends. And, you know, with family and friends, it's not intentional, but it's still a lack of understanding. And to an extent, I guess, you can only understand something if you've walked in the shoes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can be challenging all around. I think in the hospital there is a lack of awareness, a great lack of understanding, and the challenge with sickle cell is that it's an invisible disability. So
Yeah.
often people respond to what they can see.
Yeah.
And if they can't see a swollen limb or a limb missing, you know, if it's not a black eye, if it's not something they can visualize, or then they lack empathy, they lack compassion, they lack understanding. So that's kind of the experience in the hospital, where sometimes it can seem like nurses or healthcare assistants undermine what you're experiencing. And quite often, unfortunately, you have to exaggerate. I'm not gonna lie. There's times where maybe I can tolerate the pain a bit more and I don't need to be screaming and crying, and I can actually contain my emotion. But because you're not taking me seriously, I have to tap into that and do some, you know, performing arts before you take me seriously. Which it shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be the case, but it's actually the game. Not that it's a game, but you know, it's actually just a situation in where if you don't conduct yourself in a certain way, and unfortunately in a very dramatic way, you're not taken seriously. So even when you are experiencing the pain and you're able to tolerate it, and maybe even if there was like proper communications, because I've had experiences where genuinely maybe it's not the nurse's fault that I haven't received the medication, they have asked for the doctor to approve it, but the way in which they will communicate that is so patronizing and disrespectful that you're taking the piss, do you know what I mean? So instead of me being empathetic towards you because you're only doing your job, and I acknowledge that, instead of me demonstrating that empathy, I then might actually have to take a different route, whether it's asserting that I know my rights or being dramatic, as I've said. So unfortunately, that's the experience in the healthcare sector. I have had some positive experience, like on the sickle day unit at Guy's Hospital. You know, there was a young lady, she was on work experience. She was very empathetic, very attentive, very respectful. And the environment was comfortable and safe. But with the nurses, it's been a different. And it's certain hospitals as well. It's not all of them. But yeah, that can be the experience in the healthcare sector. But I think in school and the workplace, again, if you don't know your rights, it's very easy to be marginalized as an individual with sickle cell, because again, there's a very big lack of understanding, lack of awareness. So I've had past experiences where my workplace was quite far from my home, and I was only required to be in the office a few days a week, but my role didn't require me to be in office. So a reasonable adjustment would have been to allow me to work from home during those really bad winter periods. But the understanding wasn't there. And there was a time where I was meant to attend I did attend a meeting for work, and my camera was off. And they said, "Oh, why don't you put your camera on?" And I said, "Oh, my eyes were just really jaundiced and I was feeling a lot of pain. So I was in a position that wasn't appropriate to be on the camera." And his response was like, "Oh, is that an aesthetic thing then?" And I was like, "Well, you're very ignorant, aren't you?"
Serious?
In my head, I was like, "You're
Oh
very
my
ignorant."
God.
And it's like, it's not my job to educate you.
No.
You have to take the time to educate yourself. If you saw someone in a wheelchair,
You
wouldn't
don't go asking
ask them,
questions.
you know what I mean? You would just respect the fact that they have their disability.
That's it.
So yeah, there's different things you can encounter, and in schools as well, like even with my little sisters, I think for myself, because my character is quite, my mum would refer to me as a soldier at times, let me put it that way. So I can be very I can be very militant and assertive. If I feel like you're taking the piss out of me, then there's a side to me where I will correct you, and I won't be soft about it.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
It's needed
But
sometimes. It's needed.
100%, honestly. Especially when it comes to like your well-being, you know what I mean? I
Your
wouldn't be
health.
like that.
It's
Exactly.
true.
It's not just about anything. And it's like, if you don't speak up for yourself or care for yourself, there's no one around you that will. Obviously, family and friends will try, but there's going to be times when they're not there. But I think for like my little sisters, there was a level of anxiety or discomfort and awkwardness around having to speak up. And I noticed that they experienced that quite a lot in the school environment. Like one of my little sisters, when she was in college, schools are generally cold. this UK weather is just not great,
Yeah.
and
No.
schools can't even afford heating. Let's
The
just be
heating
honest about it.
system is, yeah, it's
It's
true.
It's
terrible.
It's
terrible.
You'd be
rubbish,
walking
yeah.
down the corridors shivering. Yeah.
In the teachers' rooms, they
Exactly.
have little blowers. So can you imagine like the classrooms?
You know?
Don't mind them because they won't provide for the students. It's just themselves that they will
Mm-mm.
keep cozy. But yeah, for
Yeah.
Exactly.
my little sister, she would wear her school jacket in the corridors because, like you said, you'll be walking through and you're shivering.
Yeah.
Um, but then she would have teachers approaching her every 2 minutes. Take your jacket off. Take your jacket off. Take your jacket off. Even
Oh.
after she has a EHCP plan, which stands for Education and Healthcare Plan, in place that outlines she has sickle cell. These are her requirements,
Mm.
but yet whether it's the teacher's
Oh.
unaware or they don't understand, whatever it is, it's
Yeah.
not her job to continue to have to assert that.
Explain.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, it's like all of this lack of understanding and awareness,
Mm.
it just adds more strain onto the individual
Yeah.
with sickle cell, whether it's
Wow.
emotionally draining, mentally
Yeah.
draining,
I can
even
imagine.
socially, it's awkward because imagine walking through the corridor with your friends, you've got your coat on, and the
Mm.
teacher's shouting after you. It's like,
Mm.
why? Like, you know what I mean? Drawing unnecessary attention, and also
Yeah.
you don't want to have to reassert and explain over and over
Explain
again.
yourself. You
Yeah.
shouldn't have to.
Exactly.
Yeah. You shouldn't.
You
No,
shouldn't
no,
have
no,
to.
no. No, no.
But yeah,
Yeah.
That's
that's kind of the
terrible.
reality of it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think sometimes there's a stigma of sickle cell warriors just being dramatic or doing too
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
And yeah, a lot of misconception about the reality of living the
Yeah.
disease and why certain adjustments or differences are necessary.
Mm. Mm. I think, yeah, you're right. I have actually experienced these misconceptions before because when I used to work in hospital, we used to have like quite a few sickle cell patients being admitted, and the nurses, I don't even want to mention which hospital, but the nurses would be so rude towards like the sickle cell patients, like because
Yeah.
they felt like they were demanding too much. But
Mm.
all they wanted was like their medications, their painkillers, as you said, to be given to them at the right time because obviously they were in severe pain. But I felt
Yeah.
like a lot of the nurses thought they were, as you mentioned, they were being dramatic and stuff.
Mm.
And yeah, I think this misconception is really common that sickle cell patients are very dramatic, but we don't know what you guys experience, so I think people need to stop that and basically go by what you actually tell us, they just need to accept that. Yeah. But yeah. Speaking of like the UK and everything, so recently the UK approved gene therapy treatment for sickle cell disease. What are your thoughts on this breakthrough? If given the chance, would you consider gene therapy or would you not? Why and why not?
Again, my answer's a bit controversial. I think
Okay.
with me personally, as I said, I've
Mm,
reached a stage where I understand my body, I understand
Mm.
how
mm,
to prevent my triggers and also how to treat myself when I experience a crisis.
mm-hmm.
So to be very honest, I don't even know much about the gene therapy. That's
Okay.
I wouldn't how I wouldn't say I'm uninterested, but I would, you asked would I
Consider
have
it.
it if
Yeah.
if given a I don't think I no, not I don't. I wouldn't.
Because
I
it's
wouldn't. I
supposed
think
to
for me
cure, apparently, sickle cell. So,
yeah, no, it's a no from me. Just because
mm,
I'm quite skeptical of the healthcare system, if I'm honest.
okay.
They brought out hydroxia.
Mm.
A lot of sickle cell patients took that. But
Mm,
the common thing about the healthcare system is when they bring treatments or medication, they will tell you what it's supposed to address, but they won't
mm,
highlight to you the side effects
Mm.
of that
okay.
medication or treatment. So
Mm,
there's a lot of people who I've spoken to who they took hydroxia, but then they encountered several other health challenges. Do you know what I mean? So it's
okay.
kind of like I was saying earlier, when I
Mm,
take cocodamol, it has the side effects on my stomach.
yeah.
I feel like other treatments is the same thing. You know, they
Mm,
they have their goal, they have their aim of what they're supposed to address, but they're not
Mm.
perfect. So they have that
mm,
imperfection of implementing additional
okay.
different health challenges.
Yeah.
So for me personally, I just feel like I'm at a stage where, you know, I'm comfortable in my own skin. As much as sickle cell is painful, I wouldn't change my life or swap shoes with anybody else. Yeah, I'm in a space where I'm comfortable and happy with life. And yeah, I think I know how to manage my sickle cell enough to prevent experiencing it too often, as opposed to finding it as a really big challenge. And it's part of what makes me me as well. You know, it might sound a bit crazy to say, no one wants to be in pain, but yeah, me personally, no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't take chemotherapy.
Fair enough. Yeah.
But you know, you've said it right. You know how to manage your pain. You basically know how to manage this condition. You've lived there for 27 years, and you know everything there is when it comes to yourself. So every experience is going to be unique. And also, honestly, there's always going to be concern and uncertainties when it comes to new medication, new treatments. So I feel you on that, because it would mean, okay, it's also because of who it affects, which is the minorities, us Black people. So it's a matter of who have they tested this on? You know, there's always questions like that, I'm sure, that you'd ask yourself. So I personally, I feel you. But either way, I think it's amazing that there is some sort of progress, and hopefully, hopefully there'll be more accessible options to follow. So, progress is always good. But what I'd advise people is, if you are considering this, just make sure you read thoroughly about what this is. And also talk to someone who can relate as well, before you go ahead with the treatment. I think that's normally what we always say, just speak to someone about it, get to know what it is that you're, what treatment it is that you're getting before jumping on it, basically.
Yeah, definitely. And I wouldn't condemn the treatment or have anything bad to say about it. Like I said, I don't know too much about what it entails. And honestly, sickle cell affects everybody so differently. My experience, where I'm comfortable with the level of comfortable with the level of pain,
with how you deal with it as well.
Exactly, that's my experience. But for the next person, they may be in hospital every day. Do you know what I mean? Their experience might be so much more severe.
100%,
exactly. So
100%.
I think every sickle cell warrior just has to do what's best for them and feel confident and happy about their choice. And nobody can tell them any different.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you did say something. You did say that because you've lived in a way that you are able to manage your condition in a certain way. You're able to go to the gym. You're able to go to holidays. I could see why you might hold back on trying anything new, because you don't know how that's going to affect you. You don't know if that would mean that you can't go to the gym, you can't go on holiday, you can't do the things you're used to doing now. So totally 100% understand that. Would you say, though, you've been hospital 5 times and you already know how to manage your condition, but would you say, or do you feel that the healthcare system provides enough support for sickle cell patients?
You know what, to be honest, I wouldn't say I've had an awful experience. I wouldn't say like an 100% awful experience. I think I've definitely had highlights where there's sickle cell nurses who have advocated on my behalf, or doctors who have been empathetic and have listened. So I wouldn't say it's the whole system and everything's a shambles, no, but I think there's not enough of the good, and improvements do need to be made. There are services that have been implemented in my local area more now. And they do have events where you can attend online, and it's addressing different topics around employment, marriage, childbearing. It's looking at different elements of life and how it affects a sickle cell warrior, and providing that advice. But I think maybe what needs to happen is they need to broadcast these opportunities more, but also sickle cell warriors also have to be open-minded to receiving support and take the time to look for it as well. Because I'll be honest, there's been times where, especially growing up, I didn't engage at all. So it would be wrong for me to say that there wasn't support because I didn't engage. I wouldn't really go to appointments or anything like that. But I think once I reached a certain level of understanding of the importance of those appointments, and also I reached a stage of my life where I was thinking about childbearing, marriage, and wanted to understand how, all of that would be affected by my sickle cell. That's when I engaged more. And the more you engage, the more you do actually find out about the support that's out there. So I would just encourage sickle cell warriors to attend appointments, be open with your hematologist, with your sickle team, and just be open-minded to kind of the support that they offer.
Yeah. Oh, bless. Yeah, totally agree. Like getting the support you need is like key. It's key. I think that's something that we need to lean into. Yeah. There's something that I wanted to ask as well, I feel like, back in the days, like our parents' time, people just used to go into marriage and stuff and just they just fall in love basically and don't do their due diligence to check anything. Like before I got married, like we went to do our checks, like did our blood type, like check our bloods, our genotype, all of that, just to make sure that we're okay. And in many communities now, people are now encouraged to check like their genotype before marriage to avoid like having children with sickle cell. Like, what are your thoughts on this? Because I feel like back in the days they didn't really care about that, but now, it's happening a lot more. Yeah.
I think it's very important. I also asked my partner to check, because obviously I know that I have sickle cell. So if I was to, and maybe if I break down as well, as I mentioned earlier, sickle cell is inherited. So it's a genetic disease. So I have sickle cell anemia. My blood type is SS, and that's the hemoglobin group, if I'm not wrong, the blood group.
Hemoglobin is,
So if I was to marry a man with sickle cell trait or full-blown sickle cell, so I think sickle cell trait is AS hemoglobin group, and sickle cell itself can be SS or SC. And I think there's even other forms of sickle cell. If I was to marry a man with either the trait or the full-blown disease, then our children would have the disease 100%. There would be no preventing it. So basically that leaves me with the option of marrying someone in the AA hemoglobin group, which is free of any hemoglobin disease. So I had to have the conversation with my husband, now partner at the time, and just inform him of what sickle cell is and ask him to get his blood test done so that he would know his hemoglobin group. I'll be honest, it's not an easy conversation, to be honest, especially if you're newly into the relationship. And again, that makes it so challenging because you do want to do it at the beginning of a relationship. You don't want to fall in love with someone,
that's it,
be ready to marry, and then be asking, oh, by the way, what's your what's your
I feel like that's
it's a
what
bit
our
too late.
parents did though, and then it's too late because they're in love and they can't
Exactly.
break up.
Exactly. But at the same time, there is the challenge of, someone's hemoglobin group is personal. You don't walk around. If you have a dating
That's
profile, you're
true.
not going to put on there, my blood group. You know what I mean? It's personal.
Yeah.
So even having to ask someone, oh, can you do a blood test to find out? Navigating that conversation can be very challenging. And I think that's a part of the challenge that sickle cell warriors experience, especially when trying to date and progress into marriage or relationships as they desire. But then also, like my partner, for example, so if I kind of talk on my experience, I would say I asked him maybe 3-4 months, 4-5 months into knowing him. I explained what sickle cell was. And then, asked him to get his blood group checked. And initially it was frustrating for me.
Right.
But I couldn't be annoyed because he didn't understand or know what sickle cell was before meeting me. Hadn't encountered anyone with the disease. So me asking it was kind of like, why do I need to do that? Do you know what I mean? The knowledge and the importance of it wasn't there.
No.
So that was a bit challenging. And, he didn't or he doesn't like
Oh.
needles or the sight of blood.
Oh,
So
bless
it's like,
him.
on top of sending me an errand, you're also asking me to do something that I do not
Yeah,
like
I
or
don't
want to
like.
do.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Literally.
Oh,
So
bless him.
that was challenging as well.
Yeah.
But for me, it was frustrating because it was like, this is my reality. Do you know what I mean? I can't take the choice of you doing the blood test or not lightly. It's not optional for me. It's mandatory for you to have that done and for me to know your blood group before progressing anything. But at the same time, I couldn't be mad at him because it's also his choice. Do you know what I mean? It's personal and all of that. So, but thankfully we got past that and he agreed to get it done. But then that second challenge we encountered is it's actually not as easy as it should be to find out your hemoglobin group. Like I had to do a lot of calls and a lot of circling around before it was actually done. So I found out where to do it. That was fine. My hematologist advised me. But then when he actually called the centre, there was a lot of questions and a lot of back and forth before they finally did it. So that in itself was also frustrating. And they also didn't have a lot of local centres. He had to go to one specific place that was just so far from where he lived at the time. So there's a lot of challenges around it, from kind of the emotional and mental aspect to boundaries to how it affects the dynamic of the relationship to then the logistics. But having said all of that, I guess the question that a sickle cell warrior would have to ask themselves is, would you want your child to experience the same pain or worse that you encounter? And, you know, the pain is only one part of it. For sickle cell warriors, there's the challenge of losing your eyesight. There's the increased risk of stroke. Leg ulcers is a side effect of, you know, poor blood flow in the legs can lead to a leg ulcer. Like I said, I had the gallstone. So it's kind of taking all of that into mind and looking at the bigger picture. And using that to navigate your decision as to whether you're going to ask or not and push through those challenges. So yeah, I think it's very important. I would encourage everyone, even if you don't have sickle cell, find out, because I have encountered people who didn't know they had sickle cell trait. They didn't know. So I think if you have sickle cell, you will know because you're going to experience the challenges.
You experience it.
But there's a lot of people who have sickle cell traits, which means they carry half the gene and are completely unaware because they go through their life, you know, just normal. They don't experience any health challenges. So I did a health talk at a sickle cell Christmas event, and there was a couple I encountered where they both had sickle cell trait, didn't know, and now they have a child with sickle cell disease. And, you know, that in itself, again, imagine not having sickle cell. You don't know what it feels like. You don't know how to manage it. There's no one in your family who... And then you have a child. So on top of having a newborn and having to navigate motherhood or parenthood, you now have to navigate a new disease on top. So I think it's taking all of these things in mind and not being absent-minded, but also taking the time to educate yourself and really be informed of the importance of it. And then, making that decision to find out as early as possible. So whether you have sickle cell and you want to find out your partner's hemoglobin group before getting married or having children, that's important. And even if you don't have sickle cell and you're thinking of getting married, as a Black African or Black Caribbean, it's equally important to get the blood test done. So
Wow. That is actually sad what you mentioned, which is that, you know, when your partner, when he needed to get tested, you know, and you need to find his hemoglobin group, you had to go, you know, make all these different calls, and it was only one center that offered it. I think that's not enough. I personally think that's not enough. Like, you know, there is, when it comes to, let's just, this is concentration room podcast. Let's just put it out there. When it comes to GUM clinics, which is sexual health clinics, you will find about 7 in one area. Why isn't there, do you know what I mean? Why isn't there, you know, a unit like this, you know, just for testing, you know, for sickle cell traits or anything like that in most areas? That is quite sad. I think that something needs to change there.
100%.
Yeah, but I think what you've put in such a good way, because this is a very complex topic, because it involves, you know, just personal freedom. There's cultural beliefs, you know, because people, you know, different cultures have different beliefs. You shouldn't be checking these things before, you know, they might say it's superstitious. It's almost You know what I mean? So there's things
Yeah.
like this that, you know, that come into play. And also there's, of course, the medical ethics. You know, someone might be like,
Yeah.
is it actually ethical for us to do this? So it is, I think, a very personal choice. But
Yeah.
what I would say to anyone maybe who has the trait or anyone who's going through this, what really matters is to have the information that is
Yeah.
available and to have the correct information that is
Yeah.
available to make the right decision. So I think that is key, you know, when it comes to some of these
Yeah.
things, just having the right information, because we can't, you know, you can't hold a gun to someone and say, no, you cannot marry this person or you cannot be with this person because of this. But if they have the right information, then they'll be able to make the right decisions, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
I'm learning a lot about sickle cell. So
Same.
this is beautiful.
Yeah.
You have said something around there not being enough awareness when it comes to sickle cell. But how would you like for sickle cell to be made aware to everyone? How is there a way that you feel would be best to you know, to enable awareness of sickle cell? Because let's be honest, I mean, from what we've discussed so far, there isn't enough awareness and
Yeah.
No.
definitely not enough support for those living with sickle cell. So how, like, what is ways that, you know, this can be implemented?
Honestly, I think it's about, firstly, like you said, there's not enough awareness, acknowledging that.
Yeah.
I don't think schools or places of employment actually acknowledge that and do the necessary. There's a lot of charities out there trying to push awareness and get information out. And obviously the NHS are doing their part. But I think, you know, with our it should be included in like staff training days, for example, at schools,
Yes.
places of employment. You know, when you're doing risk assessments, for example, you consider people with disabilities, but there's several types of disabilities, you know what I mean? But the only kind of the common hazard or the common group of people with disabilities that are considered in risk assessments are those in wheelchairs. You know, you would think, is the building accessible? But I think there needs to be a wider way of thinking around what accessible means and for
Yeah.
different groups of people. But yeah, I think also for me personally, I also see it as my own responsibility to extent, because I can complain that there's a lack of awareness and there's this challenge and that challenge. But at the end of the day, I'm the one affected by those challenges. So if I want to see something change, I'm going to do my part as best as I can to create that change. But, you know, also for like the younger versions of myself, you know, when I was in primary school, like I said, I was isolated a lot. I was given pen and paper and it felt like punishment, as opposed to schools finding creative ways or just intentional ways. Even it doesn't have to be complex, just being intentional about considering the impact of what and how you respond on the child. So even for like my younger self, you know, taking the time to go into schools through Sickle Cell Sister and deliver awareness workshops. At my workplace, you know, I've arranged for an awareness workshop, have some healthcare professionals come down.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's really just about everyone doing their part, you know, whether it's you have sickle cell and you're doing your part, or you have a family member of sickle cell, or even if you read something online, like there's been articles about individuals with sickle cell dying in hospital because of lack of treatment, appropriate treatment, you know, see that and actually take the time to be like, oh my gosh, like, what is sickle cell? Do you know what I mean? I think it's just about humanity, caring for humanity, really. I think, to summarize it.
But I think you've hit it right there, you know, the awareness needs to start from, I feel like, education. And if people like don't know about these things, they are really oblivious to it. Like, you know, some people don't know about sickle cell until, like, you know, if you don't have a family or a friend or something, they actually have no clue about sickle cell, isn't it? So I think, education is key. And I think there are actually some communities really trying, like when it comes to churches as well. I know there's some churches that actually encourage their members before they marry to check their genotype before getting married. So I think these platforms are quite good. So educating people from like different groups and stuff is essential when it comes to sickle cell awareness. But in all, I think you nailed it right there. Like, you have to advocate for yourself as well, when it comes to health, basically, isn't it? So we have to make other people aware. So like what we're doing right now, like, we have to share it. We need to get people to get to know about like these things that are going on, because one, like, if you don't share it, like, nobody's gonna know, right? So it's just about speaking up. Yeah. So well put. You said something earlier on, and it's just as a final thought. You mentioned that there was a couple who had sickle cell trait, and they only found out after giving birth to a child with sickle cell. And what advice would you give to such parents? Because it's quite unfortunate when that happens, because obviously they did not know they were probably sickle cell. They had sickle cell trait. Yeah. So what advice would you give to someone experiencing this?
Honestly, I think it's just at that point, you have the child with sickle cell. So I think being kind to yourself, firstly, take the time to come to terms with the realization that, okay, you yourself have sickle cell trait. What does that mean for you?
Yeah.
But then also, what does that mean for your child? So I think taking the time to come to terms with that and reflecting on what life then is going to look like for you. But also being kind to yourself. I've encountered people who have feelings of shame or guilt, which honestly, if you don't know, you genuinely don't know. It's not like you did it intentionally. It wasn't out of, it wasn't like it wasn't spite, or, you just didn't care. It was just, if you don't know, you don't know. So I think it's important to be kind to yourself and acknowledge that,
That's right.
your reality is your reality, and that's absolutely fine. I think after that, after dealing with your emotions, should I say, around understanding that you have a child with sickle cell, is education. Take the time to really inform yourself about what sickle cell is, engage with your child's hematology team, be intentional about going into spaces with other parents who have children with sickle cell or have sickle cell themselves. Whether you're going to read articles online, kind of whatever way you feel like you can learn best, be intentional about doing that, because knowledge is power. Once you understand sickle cell, I think a stigma, especially in African culture, is that sickle cell is a death sentence. It's not. It's not a death sentence. You can live a very full life with sickle cell. You can do as you please. You just have to be more intentional about caring for yourself. So I think it's about understanding how to care for your child and getting that knowledge and understanding. And I think after that, it's really just also learning how to advocate for your child. That's going to be very important in their journey of life. You advocating for them and then being able to teach them how to advocate for themselves. And then aside from that, me personally, I'm a Christian, so I would say pray. If you have a faith, give everything unto God and just trust that, literally, if you're a person of faith, trust that God will take control, and everything will be good.
Jaudat, you've been so inspiring, honestly. Hearing your perspective, your story of sickle cell, I think we've learned a lot. I personally have, because as we said, we all I feel like everybody has like a stigma or misconception about sickle cell. So you sharing your story, I think it's a start to like raising awareness about this disease. So I really, really appreciate it. Like, honestly, as you said, we should be kind. Like, if anybody is experiencing sickle cell or has a child with sickle cell, I think they need, as you said, be kind to yourself, be kind to your child. That was so important, what you said.
Thank you so much. I personally have learned so much. This has been very educational. It's been also inspiring, because when you're not living a certain life, you're not living, with a certain condition, you can't. You can only imagine, you can't really experience it like the person who is. So telling us about how your experience has been very enlightening. And I'm hoping that, maybe this has, just spread some awareness, you know,
Yes.
to people who maybe have no idea what sickle cell is. So this is the end of our conversation, but it's not the end of this conversation.
No.
This is a conversation that I think needs to continue. This is a conversation that needs to be had. It's a conversation that needs to be amplified, because there is millions of people living with sickle cell, and, you know, there's not enough people who are aware of not just even what sickle cell is, of even a condition existing called sickle cell, which is sad, because it is real. You know, sickle cell is real. It is not something in your head. It is real. So, you know, this is something that needs to be studied more, that needs to be discussed more, that needs to be made, you know, a lot more basically aware to other people. But thank you so much for joining us today. So if you are a sickle cell warrior, I think, you know, Jaudat, I'm sure you wouldn't mind a few more people in your community. So if you're a warrior and, you know, you're looking for a community of, you know, of sisters like yourself, we will put Jaudat's details below, and you can maybe get in touch with her.
That's
but if you have,
please do.
Yes, we will. We definitely will. And if you have enjoyed this episode, please share it, like it, subscribe, because what we want to do on Consultation Room Podcast is raise awareness. This is a platform to be able to have some of these conversations, which, you know, are almost considered taboo, or they're not considered, you know, they're not considered a norm. This is where we need to be sharing these conversations. So make sure you share this episode. And if you have a condition that you want us to discuss on Consultation Room Podcast, get in touch with us. But until next time, thank you again, Jaudat, and hopefully see you again soon.
Thank you, Jaudat. Thank you for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember, a healthy chat is a step towards a healthy life.
If you have any topics you'd like us to discuss, drop us an email at consultationroompod@gmail.com. Our Instagram is @consultationroompod. See you next week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay blessed.